governor's office. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to dig into some of these issues and talk about what it means in Vermont and what our candidates think. I also want to mention that we did do some endorsements for candidates for the primary. So several of those candidates are here today. There's also information about candidates on the table over there. And I also want to thank our political team and volunteers. Can you raise your hand if you're part of this Sierra Club political team? So we've got Caitlin, George, Steve Crowley, Larry here. Rob, who's our conservation program manager, is here as well. So thank you, folks, for coming and helping put this together. So I want to introduce our moderator, Deb Markowitz. She's currently the Director of Policy Outreach at the University of Vermont Gundin Institute for the Environment. She's also the former Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources and the Secretary of State for Vermont. She's participated in 7 elections, including an election for governor in 2010, so we're really grateful to have her here to be moderating this panel, so I'll turn it over to her for the remainder of the session. Thank you.
Well, it's really nice to be here, and I want to begin by congratulating the Sierra Club for holding this forum. I think it's really important that environmental organizations like the Sierra Club step it up and get candidates on the record on issues of importance to Vermonters. And we all know it, polls show in Vermont over and over again, unlike many other parts of the country, that environmental issues matter to people. They really care about clean water, they care about having untouched areas to hike and hunt and fish and explore, care about the wildlife, really care about climate change. So I would say the questions that we're going to be asking the candidates tonight are important questions. We also know that the economy is tied very closely to the environment. I'm sure we're going to hear about that a bit from the candidates. So I want to welcome you all, and I want to especially welcome our candidates, Ethan, James, Christine, and Brenda. Coming tonight, I remember the pleasure of running for office in Vermont. Primaries are tough, so my heart goes out to all of you because it's sort of family, fight, which is not always easy, but there's a tremendous personal benefit in getting to talk to Vermonters all around the state and articulating a vision for Vermont, and each one of you have done that over the course of the campaign. I've seen it from afar. I've talked to a bunch of you one-on-one, and I want to congratulate you for that. It's a lot of energy, it's a big commitment, a personal commitment, and I would bet that you're all growing tremendously from it. You should all know that the Republican candidates were also invited, but chose not to attend. I understand that the Sierra Club is not a partisan organization, and we would have welcomed the governor, Phil Scott, here, as well as his Republican opponent, Keith Stern, but they were unable to attend. To start off, I wanted to share the ground rules for this evening. Each of the candidates are going to be asked a series of questions, the same question, and we're going to start with a different person each time, so there'll be a different starter and finisher. And it'll be about their position on a variety of environmental issues. We sent the candidates the questions in advance, and we did that because this is not a stumping people's game. The goal isn't to stump them with questions they haven't thought about before. We really want their considered opinions, and also this is going to go very fast. So they're getting 90 seconds to answer very complex questions. So we thought it was a kindness, not just to them, but to the rest of us, to give them an opportunity to take a look at the questions in advance so they're ready for quick answers. And I want to thank our timekeeper in the front. She'll be giving you a sign when you've got 30 seconds left, and then a sign when it's time to be done. And then if you aren't done, she's going to give you the evil stop sign. So there we go. So thank you. Are you all ready? And at the end, you'll note that the final question is that general question. Why are you running? What's your vision for Vermont? So there'll be an opportunity for each of the candidates to make a final statement of that nature. But we're going to start really specific. And our first 2 questions are on energy and climate. Many Vermonters believe that climate change is the greatest environmental and human health challenge of our time. Last month, the Agency of Natural Resources released its latest greenhouse gas inventory report, which showed that despite strong state goals and a focus on transforming our electric energy system, Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions have increased dramatically, so that we're now up over 16% from the statutory target of 1990 levels. Our goal is to be down 50% by 2028, so we're really off track. As governor, how would you move to decrease emissions and increase the use of zero carbon energy? What would be your top priorities for action, and how would you suggest we pay for it? And why don't we start from Brenda? We'll come this way, and then we'll take turns for starters after that.
My plan calls for us to transform our transportation system. 50% of our carbon emissions comes from transportation, so that's essential to making sure that we were reducing carbon emissions. We also can move more quickly to 90 to 100% renewable energy, and we can do that by starting with our own state buildings. When we do that, we can create a fund, a voluntary fund, which we have precedent for in this state, and we can turn our buildings into renewable energy, and then we can go to our towns and ask them to come up with plans that are 90 to 100% by a certain date. That will allow us to move more quickly to 90 to 100% renewable energy, and we can also our farms can also play a role with soil sequestration. We have a lot of opportunity in this state to reduce our carbon emissions and to move to renewable energy, and it's important because when done well, it reaches people in poverty, and it builds jobs, and it attracts people to our state. So it's important for the environmental concerns, but it's also important for our state.
Thank you. Christine?
In 2004, I went to Quebec City to listen for 3 days to listen to the Intergovernmental Climate Change Commission report. And I committed my life, my career at that point, towards solving climate change. And the interesting thing about that report is it was very accurate. The disappointing part is that we're actually moving a lot faster in terms of our global temperature rise than that report had predicted. So we're actually warming faster than that report said. So we have a lot of hard work to do. So I feel real good about the work in terms of the electric grid and what we've done in order to decarbonize our electric grid and the path we're on. And an important part of that, to integrate the renewables, was to address the physics. So the past 2.5 years, I was participated with the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation on a grant from the Department of Energy to develop a plan to get us to 90% by 2050 and address all the things that need to be addressed in that. And that plan is called the Solar Pathways Report, and I would make that the comprehensive energy plan as soon as getting into office. In the interim, we certainly have a lot of work to do, and certainly focusing on transportation is important, and we are in the process of developing an integrated transportation plan that includes upgrading rail between Montpelier, St. Albans, and the Western Corridor. That plan has to be integrated with all the other transportation sources, which we're also working on an application for ride sharing.
Thank you. James?
Thank you. Thank you to the Sierra Club for hosting us tonight and for your work on this issue for many, many years now. I'm going to work with the authors of the Essex Plan. Some of the people are actually in this room to ensure that we get an Essex Plan that is taxing our biggest polluters. An Essex Plan that makes sure that we're addressing, for example, the largest consumers of our electricity and heating when it comes to who's paying. So we've put forward a luxury home tax. We're also going to invest in weatherization of homes because we know that the two largest sectors impacting our footprint is in heating and in transportation. And so weatherization is a key part of that. As I said at the last forum, and I thank my colleague for recognizing it, the governor will lead by investing in the state buildings and our state facilities first to model that behavior. And additionally, we're going to address transportation needs with putting forward a plan for commuter rail. There's already private sector investment in this area, as well as addressing the emissions coming from our industrial livestock in this state. The methane contributions are enormous and very rarely get addressed because people are concerned about addressing agriculture. Thank you.
Ethan.
We need to slow down the deterioration of our environment, and I think the way that we get there is through incentivizing corporations to move to renewable energy sources, and then, if they don't and they keep polluting, then I do support polluter pays ethics plan, as James said. I feel uniquely connected to this issue as someone who is going to inherit the actions we take right now. And that's why I'm running for governor, is because there are real issues that affect my future, and we can't talk about them in the abstract anymore. We have to talk about them in the context of how they affect real people. And that's how we're going to get to where we need to be on the environment. By going to communities and meetings like these and saying, this is going to make your life better. That's how you get the public on your side, is by convincing them that we're not taking these actions to hurt your small business or to hurt your farm. We're taking them to help your small business or your farm in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we start with Christine? Now, we're going to dig a little bit more into transportation. As a couple of the speakers noted, nearly 50% of Vermont's carbon emissions are attributed to the transportation sector. It's actually around 43%, which is significant, the most significant sector. There are numerous strategies to address this, including promoting public transit, rail, bicycle, pedestrian facilities, park and rides, and electric vehicles. But what would you advocate as an equity-based approach in our rural state to reduce carbon emissions in this transportation sector?
So ultimately, the ultimate goal is to completely electrify the transportation sector, or to get to 90% by 2050, and feed that with renewable energy. But on the interim, we would have a transportation authority that integrates all transportation modes. So, and I'll point out that why rail is important. When I talk about the Western Corridor, about moving goods, when you move goods by rail, it has 1/5 the carbon footprint that moving it by truck does. So important as an interim step to get to rail for moving goods on the Western Corridor, and moving people from Montpelier to Burlington to St. Albans. When you move people in a rail, it's about 1/20th to 1/25th the carbon footprint. So that's a real critical component as an interim step to get to full electrification. But key to all that will be integrating the schedules so that you have train schedules, rail schedules integrated with bus schedules, integrated with vehicle ability. When I talk about vehicle ability, I'm talking about having ride-sharing apps that everybody can participate in and also call in if you don't have a phone, and also bicycle transportation and pedestrian transportation. So the way this works effectively is when you've got a totally integrated transportation system. Because what you don't want to do is get off the train and not be able to get on a bus or be able to access a vehicle. So that's the interim plan.
Thank you. James?
So when I was 13, I wasn't running for governor like my colleague Ethan here, but I did win the science medal for designing a solar-powered engine. So there are a few people around who are more frustrated with the lack of action that we've seen as a society in moving towards renewable energy. So one of the big things, and I think I'm going to think bigger than has been previously mentioned, is our governor's office has the ability to sway other governors around the nation who are all in the same position. And as a veteran, I can tell you that if we factored in the cost of U.S. servicewomen and U.S. servicemen's lives at the gas pump, we would have moved away to a different fuel source long ago. The subsidy of the fossil fuel industry has to end. Here, closer to home, our economy and our ecology are intricately tied, and just in the root word, eco, which stems from the Greek oikos, meaning home. And so we're going to put forward an economy that is in harmony with the ecology, taxing the polluters, and using it to invest in public transportation and in rail. Thank you.
I said from day one of my campaign that the way we solve these important environmental issues is by building the right kind of infrastructure in our communities. Ultimately, many of the issues we face can be solved by building new infrastructure or repairing the infrastructure we already have. And I think we have to make sure that there is reliable public transportation all over the state. I do understand that that is big picture thinking and a long-term plan. Right now, what we can do is, like Christine said, we can make sure that there are rideshare programs, and we can make sure that people who drive electric vehicles, there are some issues with electric vehicles, and there are some issues with how their drivers can pay back into the system. But I believe that if we incentivize it the right way, people driving electric vehicles can have a significant impact on our transportation system and the way we move around the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Brenda, you want to pass it back up?
So as I alluded to before, my plan calls for transforming our transportation system. This would cost very little money right off the bat. When I started my campaign, I thought that I would be suggesting we study transportation because most of our money comes from federal funding, and right now I don't see us getting a lot more federal funding from Washington. However, what I've learned since is that we have a lot of transportation throughout this state that's just not organized very well. We can look at all of it on a grid and reorganize it so that it's hitting a lot more homes. In counties like Addison County, there's enough transportation to hit almost every home if we just make it more user-friendly. That's something we can do for very little cost, and then we can have a statewide bus pass, which all the companies can be reimbursed for. And that means that they will buy into our system because the system will then be more user-friendly. That's a start. We also can create renewable charging stations at our state buildings for electric vehicles so that our state employees can have access to electric cars and have them used more effectively.
Thank you. Let's move on. We'll start with James and talking about clean water. There's two questions in this section. We're going to do one at a time. 3 years ago, Vermont passed a new clean water law in recognition that more needs to be done to clean up our lakes and ponds. The new law largely focused on curbing pollution caused by surface runoff from parking lots, roads, farms, and lawns. Despite strict deadlines in the law and a requirement of action by EPA requiring action, so far state leaders have failed to implement the required regulations or identify a permanent funding source to help pay for the cleanup efforts. In a 2017 report, the Vermont State Treasurer recommended at least $25 million per year in new funding for 20 years that was needed to clean up Lake Champlain and protect Vermont's waters. Do you agree with this? How would you propose to raise the required funds to clean up the lake? And how would you propose to invest and administer the funding?
I agree with the Treasurer's report, except for the fact that it needs to be considerably greater than $25 million. And that's based on 3 reports prior to that: Act 97, Act 138, Act 64, have all recommended a myriad of funding sources. And so those funds have to be invested because there is no healthy economy that disregards the ecology. It's just not possible. Water, the most fundamental necessity for life. It's in large part why I'm running, because it unites all of us, upstream and downstream. We can't live without it. And so how would we fund it? Who would administer it? I would work with the legislature to pick from the many menus that we have that requires the polluters to pay. And just like the questions before this, we are going to reform and overhaul the tax code so that we ensure that we have an economy in harmony with the ecology, not one that continues to rely on poisoning our planet and exploiting our people. This is all very doable if we ask the polluters to pay, the biggest polluters who profit off of our land and off of our labor. There is no candidate anywhere who will be more committed to addressing our water issues.
Thank you, Deepa.
Clean water is absolutely essential. We have to accept the treasurer's report because, it was well researched, it was well done, and having spoken with the treasurer, she and her office put quite a lot of work into that report. It was not something that was done hastily, and it was not something that was done without necessity. I would be open to exploring putting more than $25 million a year over 20 years into the cleanup effort, but I would like to I would like to consult with the treasurer and the legislature before I would commit to that. But the thing about our state budget is, and feel how you will about this, it's not static. Money can be moved, and I firmly believe on the budget that except in extreme cases, you can always find the money in the budget. Sometimes you need to create more revenue for expensive big picture programs on things like healthcare and jobs. But on this specific issue, I think we can find $25 million that's already in the budget, and I think that we can put that $25 million to good use, and working with the treasurer and the legislature, figure out how we can make the cleanup effort as streamlined and as effective as it can be.
Thank you. You want to bring it back to Dr. Brennan?
We need to begin to think of issues like these as essential and investments in the future of the state of Vermont. Our farmers in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s were pushed by our state government and by big companies to use phosphorus and other chemicals, which are now polluting our waterways. We need to make sure that we are helping them figure out a new way to do their farming or to come up with new ways to farm altogether. We can do this by bringing those voices to the table as well, and we can use the treasurer's report for funding, and also we don't need to just clean up the waterways in Lake Champlain, but all across the state, and we need to update our treatment sewage plants as well, because otherwise we'll continue to keep polluting, in addition to drainage and the flood areas where we don't have buffer zones. I lost everything I own in Tropical Storm Irene because the buffer zones were not well used. So those flood zones are something that we need to be dealing with just as strongly as we are cleaning up the waterways. So when we're making a plan to clean up the waterways, we're gonna end up right back here if we don't do what it takes to stop the pollution in the first place. And that includes getting buy-in from the farmers who, as my experience of going around the state has been, are feeling very frustrated because they said, we're gonna be polluting the waterways and you are gonna blame us. And now we're blaming them. So that is absolutely true that it has to stop, but we need to work with them to make it stop.
Thank you, Christine.
Just saying no to new taxes is a no-brain activity, and we need a leader who uses their brain to make strategic investments. And what we're talking about here, water quality, is a strategic investment. I'm going to tell you a story about when I came to work at Vermont Electric Co-op and took over leadership. That company had the highest rates in the state and the highest number of outages, and the member owners were pretty angry. I went to the board of directors and the members and said, we need a 7.25% increase to invest in our infrastructure. And they said, well, we've got the highest rates in the state, we can't afford to do that. I said, you can't afford not to do that because you've got to focus on your service first. We made that investment, we put a 10-year plan together. Since 2010, our average rate increase was 0.8%. The last 5 years, it was 0%. That's what a strategic investment will do for you. Now, there's places where we can get this kind of funding. For example, the ACLU has a plan to bring the prisoners back to Vermont and cut the prison population in half. We spend $140 million a year on our prisoners. That frees up $70 million. We need to move to tax and regulate on marijuana sales as quickly as possible because we're in a dangerous place because people don't know what's in their marijuana and where it's coming from. By the way, it's another $25 million. So there's $105 million right there that can be used for those strategic investments. But even without those funding, this is a strategic investment that will pay for itself in the long term.
Thank you. So we'll start with Ethan. Hardly a week goes by without another story of a combined sewer overflow, dumping millions of gallons of untreated or partially treated waste into our lakes, rivers, and streams. This highlights a crisis of aging water and sewer infrastructure and the failure to properly manage stormwater. What steps would you take to ensure that wastewater does not end up in our waterways?
It's like I said about infrastructure. We have to make sure that that the system we use to treat wastewater and sewage is up to date. We need to make sure that the infrastructure isn't just there, but that it's effective. Because, we can have all the infrastructure we want, but if these things keep happening, the infrastructure is failing. We need to make, as Christine would call it, a strategic investment in making sure that we keep our rivers and streams and lakes clean. This is part of something else that I think is too often overlooked when we talk about the environment. It's how intertwined it is with the economy. We can do anything when we recognize that the economy and the environment are interconnected. And I think that infrastructure is oftentimes looked at as an economic issue. It can be looked at as an economic and an environmental issue, and we have to update this infrastructure, and we have to do it with investment from the state to make sure that that investment is going to be the one that sticks.
Thank you. Brenda.
I feel like I just answered this whole question. But we do need to update our infrastructure. We need to update our wastewater sewage plants, and we need to work on our drainage and culverts around the state, as well as our flood zones, like I said before. What I know is that I believe in a progressive tax structure, but taxing the wealthy and taxing the polluters is not an all-encompassing solution. We have to have other ways to create revenue. I also know that it does cost money to solve climate change. And so it's really essential that we do what it takes, we make this investment. We do this by building a bottom-up economy, by making sure that Vermonters have money in their pockets and making sure that they can spend their money in local stores and restaurants, and that tax revenue is coming back to the state. That's our solution to a lot of the problems across the state, because when we build a more vibrant economy, when we have stronger tax revenue, that is when we really have access to more money to solve some of these issues. However, this is an essential investment. So we need to make this investment like it's an investment in our future and think about the long-term economy and health of our state, not just the next year or 2 years or 3 years. And when we do that, we understand that scarcity is a myth, and there is a way to solve this problem, and where there is a will, there is a way.
Thank you, Christine.
We had a new question.
Did you start this question?
Yes.
Combined sewer overflow?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I thought,
Yeah, you know, I spent 12 years on the Lemoyne Economic Development Corporation, and we have there's 13 regional development corporations in the state, and those development corporations have these things called revolving loan funds, which allows people to access capital, allows small businesses to access capital and get what they need done. Now, those businesses pay back that fund over time, and that fund stays whole and healthy. I would certainly put a large insertion into the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund so that communities would have access to capital to be able to upgrade their facilities. The real issue for communities is their ability and access to capital. So if you look at that, you put the strong bond rating of the state, the strong borrowing power of the state into this large fund. It really doesn't really cost the state money. It really is about keeping our strong rating. And then managing that fund is what keeps the rating alive in order to allow that money to be spent by the towns. So the most important thing we can do for the towns is provide them access to the capital that they need in order to rebuild their sewer systems. Because it's an expensive venture, and it's not that the towns don't want to do it. They need access to capital.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. First, I want to thank several people in this room who worked with me 3 years ago to pass the legislation requiring municipalities to publicly report these combined sewer overflows. So often in the discussion around phosphorus, we forget that what we're releasing into our rivers, treating them as sewer pipes, and into our freshwater bodies, treating them as cesspools, is human pathogens and viruses, and everything else that winds up going down toilets, through hospital sewer pipes, down gutter drains, all of it winds up in our drinking water supply. And so access to revenue is one leg of that stool, but what's equally important is holding developers accountable, the developers who profit off of continuing to add more and more pavement, adding it on to systems that do not have the capacity currently to address it. For 200 of the 251 communities in the state, insufficient water and wastewater infrastructure is the limit to economic growth. It's not environmental regulation, it's not high taxes. And so investments in combined sewer systems is not only critical to public health, it's critical to the economy. Third part of that is a governor who has the ability to work with the other states to ensure that the state revolving funds are fully funded. We have not funded drinking water and wastewater in this nation in decades sufficiently. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to bring it back to Brenda, and then she'll start with the question about forests. Vermont stands at the center of the largest remaining block of deciduous temperate forest in the world. I hadn't added, did you know that? It's pretty important. And in part because of our calcium-rich soil, we've got uniquely rich biodiversity. As a result, Vermont's connected forest blocks create critical wildlife corridors that can support thousands of species despite the uncertainties of climate change. Unfortunately, for the first time in decades, the percentage of Vermont's landscape that's forested is in decline. While over 75% of Vermont's lands are in forests, the vast majority of this land is owned privately, and the majority of these private landowners are over the age of 60. So we can anticipate that in the coming decades, there will be even more development of forest land as part of the generational transition of ownership. How would you work to address this problem and preserve our important connected forest land?
I want to start by saying that my family owned for 70 years 150 acres of land in southern Vermont, and when my grandfather died, we had to sell it because our family could not afford it and could not afford the property taxes on it. So I understand, I was very worried about this issue because of that. So there's a multi-pronged approach. We've had a long-term collaborative effort with national lands, state lands, and nonprofit groups such as Nature Conservancy to conserve our lands. And so that is one aspect. We can continue to develop and work on that as well. We also can work on groups like Nature Conservancy will buy this land, put deed restrictions on it to preserve things like the vernal pools, and then sell it back into the public, people can develop on it in a way that is still safe for our ecology. So that's another way that we can work on it. And also local zoning restrictions. We want to have these wildlife corridors, and we want to make sure that we continue to have our strong forested land in Vermont. And it doesn't have to combat development, but it has to be done wonderfully for our ecology.
Thank you, Kristen.
You know, I'm challenged that we can grow our economy without impacting our forests. If you look at my plan for rural economic development, the reason I focus on rural economic development is because we have a lot of uninhabited home and office space in rural Vermont. Rehabilitating our communities and rebuilding our towns allows growth and basically allows us to put more food on the table without actually negatively impacting our landscape. And I will tell you, when I also challenge that we can put plans in place. When I came to Hyde Park from Waterbury Center in 1984, the first thing I did is I led a group to write the zoning plan for the town of Hyde Park. And we give strong incentives for density development. So you give credits for density development and keeping other spaces open. So if you do get development, it is done in a way that keeps land open, and you get there by creating enough of an incentive for that density development. So for example, I don't like 10 acre zoning, but if you have 10 acre zoning, you're allowed to build 10 units on that zoning. Well, you give the developer strong credits for putting 20 units in one building in one place, and then leaving the rest of it open under a conservation easement forever. That's an effective tool. It's been proven nationally that it works well. So I challenge that, and also part of economic development is attracting the right businesses. We aren't going to attract energy-intensive businesses. We're going to attract small entrepreneurial businesses that work well with our countryside.
Thank you. James.
Thank you. I think everyone in this room knows the importance of open forest land and how much it means to the fabric of the state, how much it means to us spiritually, on an individual level, but also it's an important part of our brand and our image, and it's the reason why many people come here to vacation. And so for me, again, this comes down to reforming taxes, overhauling the tax code to ensure that we have investments in practices that are in harmony with the ecology. So there's a lot of pressure right now, particularly on current use, which basically the funding for current use is what we raise in corporate taxes. I think that's a massive problem when Vail Mountain Corporation, which made $256 million last quarter, is basically getting a steal on the use of our public lands. That money can and should be used to assist Vermonters who want to keep their lands open for recreation, who want to keep it open for working forests with value-added products built right here in Vermont with the hands of Vermonters, as well as its importance to clean water. And so working with the Gooden Institute on the ecological value and building that into our tax structure is something that I look forward to doing with you as your governor.
Thank you, Ethan.
Our biodiversity is a big part of what makes Vermont unique. Building off what James said, people come here because they want to ski on our mountains and they want to hike in our woods. And if we're sacrificing those things for a quick buck that comes from short-term logging, then we're doing it wrong. And I think that ultimately, we need to make sure that we recognize that we can't just sell out the environment to make foresters like Vermont more. It is not the job of the state government to appease the foresting industry, period. And, I think we can bring business here, and I think we can make the money that loggers aren't getting when they are clear cutting our forests. We can bring small sustainable businesses here, and we don't need businesses that are going to destroy our natural lands. So I think it's crucial that we move to that we get a governor and a state government that recognizes that our environment is not expendable and that it is not our job to make corporations happy.
Thank you. We're going to start this next, next question starts with Christine. This is a little bit of a wonky question. You may not have known this, but Vermont Agency of Natural Resources pays for a significant part of its forestry budget by using proceeds from timber harvests on state lands, despite legislation that directs those proceeds to the Land and Facilities Trust Fund. This is not surprising as general fund dollars are tight, but it means that department resources are diverted from other priorities to focus on timber harvests. Please share your thoughts on how you would address this problem, as well as whether you believe it's important for some lands to be left wild.
I had the opportunity in the mid-2000s and late 2000s, the State Office of Economic Development asked me to work with them to develop, be able to use our forest products for generating electricity. And I worked with a person I respect highly, a state forester named Bob DeGuss, who taught me a lot about the forest. And the most important thing he taught me was to walk away. Using wood for electricity would really be bad for the forest. But at the same time, what he also taught me is a well-managed forest is the best forest in terms of wildlife and reproduction of the forest. An unmanaged forest itself is it tends to stunt growth and hurt wildlife. So we have a good forest management program, and it's important to continue to carry that out. When you talk about funding, this is why I talk about we've got to grow our Vermont economy through connecting every home and business with fiber. And the reason we need to do that is we need to get more food on the table. Because we've got all kinds of programs trying to compete for revenue sources, including this important program. And if we continue to see a demographic shift that we're seeing today, we're going to continue to have this problem of where do we get the revenues. We can change this demographic shift. We've done it in other places in rural America with a third of the density of Vermont. And we will do that without negatively impacting our towns. We will positively impact because we've got lots of opportunity in rural Vermont.
Thank you, James.
Deb, could I get you to just read the last two parts of that question again, please?
Sure. So the question part of it is to share your thoughts on how you would address the problem of having this incentive to have our foresters focus on marking lands for timber sales as opposed to doing their other work, because the timber sale is what ends up paying for their salaries. And then whether you believe it's important for some lands to just be left wild.
Sure, thank you. So, managed lands are certainly important. I think everyone in here knows that, but I equally agree that old growth or unmanaged forests are also important. And I have great confidence in the scientists at the Agency of Natural Resources to know where those places best are, because it contributes to a biodiversity that does not exist in a managed forest. With respect to the State Lands and Facilities Fund, that is a problem throughout the Agency of Natural Resources, where we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So again, we have to reform the tax code to ensure that we are taxing the proper vehicles in the economy to ensure that foresters are also out there protecting and identifying forests to be protected. So I would add to the Agency of Natural Resources staffing, because this is also good for business, because those same people are involved in the permitting process of Act 250, which so often gets thrown under the bus, particularly by our Republican colleagues, as it being bad for business. Well, when you purposely cut the staff positions involved in issuing those permits, well, yeah, it's understandable that business people would get upset with the speed of the permit process. And so we can be pro-business and pro-environment at the same time by making sure that we're fully funding these positions, and not just forests, but the fuel oil spill recovery fund is another big hidden mess.
Thank you. Ethan.
this is, there are a lot of specific issues with this, there are a lot of specific issues addressed in this question. When it comes down to it though, it's an administrative issue. It's about how we can fix this cycle of allowing this self-serving behavior. And I don't fault people who are taking it, but we do have to change, we have to change the system. That's how we're gonna see the changes we need to see in our environment, and it's how we're gonna see the changes we need to see in state government. I also think it's important for a governor to work with his administration, not against it. And I think that scenario where this governor has quite simply failed is by refusing to acknowledge that the environmental experts in state government know more about the environment than he does. They do. And I think that's how we're going to change the system, is by getting a governor who recognizes that we have to trust the experts. And fundamentally, it's about values. It's about whether or not we think that our government should be working for what we know is the scientific right thing to do, or working for an ideological political position.
Thank you. This next question, James will... Oh, I'm sorry, Brenda. Thank you for helping me keep track.
Happens all the time. So, selective forestry is not necessarily bad because it helps manage our lands and keep the health of the forest. However, all across the country, because Trump has cut a lot of funding for our national lands, this has become an issue. We want to make sure that we are using this funding. This funding can help to build up the forestry. However, we need to make sure that we're using it appropriately. We also want to make sure that the wild lands are, if they're budding managed lands, we can cause serious problems within the managed lands, creating an environment for invasive species, as well as not allowing for new growth that we need. So I would say that it's essential that we make sure that we are referring to our ecologists when we're deciding where we leave it wild and where we use managed lands. And that we work on the funding sources so that we are really building up the funding within our state lands and making sure we're doing what is actually best for our forest and not just standing behind what's coming from Washington and pushing back, but getting ahead of what's coming from Washington so that we make sure we are protecting the ecology of this state so that we can build on the economy the environment of this state. That's really essential to us making a real difference in this issue.
Thank you. So now, James, starting this next two questions relate to toxic pollution. The Vermont legislature this year passed a bill that would greatly improve monitoring, protection, and response for the toxic pollution of groundwater. Unfortunately, the bill was vetoed by Governor Scott. Considering that most Vermont residents get their water from private or municipal wells, and the experience of people and communities responding to the PFOA contamination in and around Bennington, what would you do to better protect Vermonters from chemical contamination of their drinking water?
I would do what I've been doing. I was, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago, 7 days, ran a story regarding what's in our drinking water, a story I brought to the media because I did not feel it was getting the necessary attention from the appropriate officials, raising the concern that we were not testing properly nor requiring proper testing sufficiently enough to prevent another Flint, Michigan type situation here in Vermont. Unfortunately, during that time frame, we learned of the PFOA poisoning in Bennington, and since then people have been paying more attention to it. The governor didn't just veto one bill, he vetoed 2 bills, S-197 and S-103, which were the byproduct of the Act 154 Toxic Chemical Work Group, which I served on with Vermont Law School and other advocates from the environmental community. People who are truly invested in protecting people and the planet. Not chemical companies, not the insurance industry, but protecting people and the planet. And so as your governor, I pledge to you, first and foremost, that will be the type of economy that will attract young people as well, because no one wants to live in a state with polluted and poisoned water. Thank you.
Thank you. Ethan?
I can answer this question in one phrase: the toxic spill. I will go into more detail, though. Since day one of my campaign, I've been running on a pretty simple principle, that it's the role of government to make people's lives better. And we're not looking out for everyday Vermonters when we're allowing this kind of contamination to happen all over our state. We're not looking out for everyday Vermonters when we're brushing these issues aside to focus on, things that make better platforms or things that get more media attention. And we're not making life better for Vermonters when we don't give this the attention it deserves, not just in the media, but in state government. We need to tackle this issue head on, and I would work with anybody who is willing to work, Republican or Democrat or progressive or independent, it doesn't matter to me. We need to solve this crisis by taking action that we know is backed up by science and that we know will make Vermonters safer.
Thank you. Brenda?
We need to pass and sign the toxic spills. I sat in the House chambers and watched the veto override not happen. I was extremely disappointed. Shame on people for making children who are being poisoned not a priority so that they could back a Republican governor. Shame on them. I live in southern Vermont, and I know that often our part of the state gets ignored when there are serious problems. I live only 45 minutes from Bennington. This is a serious problem that we have, and it's one of the reasons that we need to make sure that our next governor is someone who will bring every single voice to the table. That means not just having a seat at the table, but inviting people's voices. People in Bennington were working extremely hard. Nobody wants a savior. They want to be part of the solution. There is a major problem with that part of the state getting ignored when we have serious issues, and Bennington's poisonous water, which is hurting our families and children, is a good example of that. Phil Scott felt the need to protect big businesses over our families. Shame on him, and shame on the Republicans who went along with that and did not override that veto. We need to do better, and we can do better, and we do it by making sure that those are the voices that are part of the solution, and that we aren't sitting here saying we will be the savior, but we actually make them part of the solution.
Thank you. Christine?
Governor Scott talked about affordability, and when vetoing S-197, it's clear who he's talking about, who that affordability is going to. That's the affordability for the large corporations and the businesses. Also coupled with that, the fact that he vetoed a raise for minimum wage workers as well as a family leave policy. I'm going to tell you that this is why we need an activist government, because there are 13 states that have similar bills to S-197. So it's more, there are other states that believe this is important. And water and air doesn't know a state boundary. So this is where I talk about unionizing with other states to achieve these goals, because we know it's not going to get solved out of Washington. We need to form unions of states in order to push back on some of these headwinds that are coming in Washington, as well as to accomplish goals. Now, we've done that successfully with other areas. For example, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a 19-state compact that's worked well for a long time. New Jersey dropped out of it for a couple of years, but came back in. So this is where we we need to look beyond our borders and have an activist governor that gets out there and organize with other states as well.
Thank you. We're going to start this next question with Ethan. Many of Vermont's conventional farmers are dependent on toxic pesticides and herbicides such as glyphosate, atrazine, and neonicotinoids. While these chemicals may help farmers increase their yields, there's growing evidence that these chemicals also harm wildlife and pollinators, pollute our surface waters, and they can also harm the farm workers. What policies would you enact to address this issue? Are there incentives or policies you propose to help Vermont's agricultural community transition away from chemical-intensive agriculture? And would you support legislation that would suspend the use of neonicotinoids in Vermont?
I don't think it's mutually beneficial or mutually exclusive to support the environment and support farmers. You know, farming is a crucial part of Vermont's economy, and it's a crucial part of Vermont. It's what makes so many of our communities so strong. It's like I said in the very first question. When we go to these farmers and business owners and we ask them to make these changes in the way they do things, it's for them, not against them. And I think we go about it the wrong way. I think that we too often talk about in the abstract about these chemicals. We don't talk about the real human implications. We don't talk about farm workers who are being harmed by these chemicals, and we don't talk enough about people who are seeing real environmental impacts in their everyday lives, people who live on waterways, people who work in Lake Champlain, and we have to realize that this is about more than the chemicals. It's about how we can make sure that people are safe. That's fundamentally what protecting the environment is about. And until we're doing that, we're not addressing the environmental issue. Until we're addressing how agriculture uses the environment, then we're not addressing the environmental issues.
Thank you.
One thing that's happened with this administration, with Phil Scott's administration, is that he's completely cut out David Zuckerman. So our Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman, who, by the way, we all know is a farmer, has been cut out of all of the conversation surrounding this, except with the legislature. So one way that we can work on this, and by the way, is an organic farmer, so not using these chemicals, is we can bring him into the fold and have him lead on this issue and help to bring farmers into the fold to become less dependent on these chemicals. That's a really essential way for us to do this. Right now, we have a government that doesn't work because we have a governor who doesn't work with anybody. We can do better than that as long as we're allowing everybody in. We know, like I said before, that farmers were pushed into using these chemicals in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So bringing them to the table with strong leadership, like Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman, is a great way to start to get buy-in to make a change. We have to do that. And we do have to make sure that it reaches people who are struggling, smaller farmers who also are polluting and who are struggling to get out of that cycle. And then we can do what it takes to make sure that we are no longer having that runoff, that chemicals are not ending up in the air. That's what it will take to change this.
Thank you, Christine.
Bee colony collapse is a serious issue, and I would certainly support the ban of neonicotinoids. I would also, look at, I find it very shameful when I see people mowing solar fields. I would require pollinator species to be put in all the solar fields, because as we grow our use of solar, we can grow our use of pollinator species. And I also will tell you that part of the economic development plan that includes connecting every home with business fiber is really to help our farmers move away from the energy-intensive crops of dairy. Give them the opportunity to move into other areas that actually give them more revenue. You know, we have a very successful maple industry. Our maple products are being sold around the world. Japan's a big consumer of maple. And the reason is because we have a distribution network for that. So if you think of the farmer that's doing dairy today, which is a highly energy-intensive crop, giving, you know, Sally Schmo's dairy farm, giving her the opportunity to make Sally Schmo's blueberry jam, growing those blueberries and selling them all over the world as a Vermont branded product, organic, GMO-free. There's where you get the real margin. That's where you provide revenue and getting away from dairy, which we're producing 30% more milk than we did in the 60s. So all of this plan is integrated when I talk about the 4 goals that I have for my campaign, and that's the work we have to do.
Thank you. James.
Pesticides are a serious threat, not just to Vermont's future, but to the future of the planet. So it's absolutely critical that we have an economy that's in harmony with the ecology. One of the side effects of atrazine use that's propped up under the notion that we need more cheap corn is that the smallmouth bass population in the Missisquoi River the male smallmouth bass population is exhibiting female reproductive attributes. 75% of the male smallmouth bass sampled. This is directly related to the endocrine disrupting impacts of chemicals like atrazine. And so for me, this issue is a massive issue that doesn't require input, it obligates the governor under law to protect the interest of the people, not of industries. The state of Vermont has primacy under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so I will ban the use of pesticides by our own state government, which sprays up and down interstates and state highways right now with our permission. I will put an end to that practice, and we will move towards a pesticide-free agriculture industry by ensuring that our family farms get a farm bill that allows them to grow crops ecologically sustainably.
Thank you. If you want to take it down to Brenda. So equity and environmental justice are really important. In Vermont, we're becoming increasingly diverse, and yet it's still mostly straight white men who serve in agency leadership, on our courts, on our boards and commissions, and in other positions of power and authority. How would you, as governor, work to address the explicit and implicit bias that has kept people of color, Native Americans, immigrants, women, LGBTQ, and marginalized communities out of positions of power?
I'm going to start by winning the primary and then the general election. I also believe it's essential and part of my platform to make sure that all the voices are at the table, and that includes creating a much more diverse administration. The Brattleboro community where I grew up just went through a training program and a reach out program to try to bring more people of color and immigrant families into our town government, and Burlington has done the same. It's something that we can do at the state level as well. When we see leadership that doesn't look like us, it's very hard then to put yourself forward and be part of that leadership. So we have to actually put an effort in. It's not enough to say we are going to welcome different voices. We are going to welcome people of color. We are going to welcome women. But we also have to make sure that we are reaching out. We also, if we're in a more privileged sector, we also have to step aside and allow people that are minorities and voices that we haven't heard before to come in to power and leadership. Because things change across our state and across our nation when we don't just allow this to change, but we make sure it changes. And we only make sure it changes when we decide that this is going to happen because I am willing to put myself to the side so that every single voice is heard in our government. And it's something that we need to do because it is a priority in this state right now.
Thank you, Christine.
You know, I come out of an industry that's 19% woman, the electric utility business. And in the company I was running, 16 of the 20 highest paid people were line workers. And if you look at throughout the state, line workers is a great profession, and it's paid very well, but there are no women in the profession. So I'm proud to say that our leadership team was 50% female when I left. Actually, I helped change that to even get more than 50%. But I also tell you, my experience is, its bias is very implicit. It's one thing to understand it, it's the other thing to experience it. So it's one of these things that we really have to measure, and we have to have oversight boards. So for example, I would make sure we report and measure how marginalized communities are being disciplined in our schools, in our workplaces, and in our policing, and have an oversight board to look at those numbers and put in corrective actions. And I would also recruit nationally to work on changing the diversity of Vermont's homogeneous population. And we will be a very immigrant welcoming state. Immigrants, I hear employers all the time talk about how they need employees. Well, immigrants are hard workers. They bring diversity to our state, and we all become enriched through diversity.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. It's an important issue. I'm going to continue to be an ally to women, people of color, the LGBTQIA community, as I have been my entire life. We've demonstrated that throughout this campaign. My campaign is dominated by women, and we have advisors from all of the other communities that are not represented sufficiently in our state government. So as governor, I would invite people from those communities to help us decide to ensure that we have the most diverse cabinet in history. And I agree with Christine when it comes to immigration. That's why for the last 15 years, I've been taking refugees into my home, some of them living there for as long as 6 months, in order to help them make the transition into Vermont. We need to be the state we believe ourselves to be, our shared humanity. As a naval officer, one of the very first things that became apparent, a community where integration has in the military, where integration has been on the forefront, we all bleed red. And so I will be a friend to everyone that shares our values of protecting people and planet.
Thank you, Ethan.
Hillary Clinton promised a cabinet that looks like America. I'm promising a cabinet that looks a lot more diverse than Vermont. We have serious demographic struggles in our state. It all comes down to who we want our government to be working for. Because I agree with the premise of the question. When government is run by straight, white, cis males, government works for straight, white, cis males. And the way we can't make people from different backgrounds and different communities come here, but we can make it so that they want to. We can build resources in our communities so that we are a welcoming state. You know, we get painted as this, we get painted as this very white state. And we can change that. And it does involve welcoming immigrants here, and it involves making sure that, we say, if you want to come here, we will open our arms and our doors. We cannot be a state that excludes anybody, because that's a model that is A, immoral, and B, will hurt all aspects of policy, from the economy to the environment.
Thank you. You want to pass it to Christine for the final closing question. And that's just your big question. Why are you running for governor? And what is your vision for Vermont?
I love Vermont. Vermont's been very good to me. And my life passion was to demonstrate the electric grid could be used to solve climate change. When I left Vermont Electric Cooperative in March, we were 96% carbon free. We were offering incentives for people to move away from fossil fuel heating, cooling, and transportation. And we did that without a rate increase for 5 years. Essentially proving you can solve climate change and it does not cost more money. And I will tell you, my love for Vermont, I've always been involved with civic activities, served on school boards, chaired mental health boards. Past 5 years I've been moderator of my town meeting. And I did a lot of work nationally in terms of climate change. And I was always proud of coming back to Vermont because we'd come back and we would pull shoulder to shoulder, despite our differences, to do great things. For example, Act 56, which I think is the most advanced climate change legislation in the world, was passed in the United States. It was passed in 2014. We all work together to get that done. But if I look what's happened in the past few years, we have a governor that's been focused on division rather than unity and solidarity. And what I would do for Vermont is I would focus on rural economic development, which would include connecting every home and business with fiber optic cable, so Vermonters can be connected to the internet at the same speed as New York and Tokyo, as well as rebuild our downtowns using tax increment financing districts. I would continue to move us toward improved Medicare for all and unite with other states to achieve that goal. I would accelerate the work we're doing on climate change, as well as ensure every child receives a quality public education. And there's a lot of that.
Thank you. James.
A little over a year ago, I launched a grassroots campaign refusing to take any corporate money. After 20 years in public policy, a good number of those years spent as an advisor to Senator Sanders, I've seen firsthand the corruption of money in politics. S-197, S-103 are perfect examples. I could go down the list. And so for me, I want to ensure that there's a governor that works for the people and our portion of the planet, not the special interest. I believe together we can fashion an economy that works in harmony with the ecology and put an end to an economy where only a handful of people profit off the exploitation of our fellow Vermonters, even ourselves, and our landscape. And so I ask you to be the change we've been waiting for. We can do this. We can do this in Vermont and show the rest of the nation that little Vermont is going to once again be the tip of the spear when it comes to protecting people and the planet. So I ask you, please, this is a watershed moment, bad pun intended, that we are facing here in Vermont, a chance we have to reshape and be the Vermont we know we can be. Thank you.
Thank you. Ethan.
Ultimately, I can overwhelm you with rhetoric and with talking points, but that's not effective. And it's not how it's not how any of the four of us up here should govern if elected. Ultimately, this is about what happens next in our state. We can dwell in the past and we can talk about important issues that we face right now, but the way we need to be running our campaigns is looking forward. This is about making life better for everyday Vermonters who are struggling to get ahead. That's how we build our future, is by looking out for working and middle-class families, by looking out for all those in Vermont who have for so long been left behind by the system. If we really want to build our future, we have to start with a candidate who's going to live that future. And this is about that future. The way we get there, the way we start today, is by making a fundamental change in Montpelier, by electing a governor who's working for constituents, and by recognizing that the Vermont dream of strong communities with strong values, that's something we need to see in a governor, and that's what I'm prepared to do.
Thank you. Brenda.
About a year and a half ago, I started doing some informal research to find out how well I was reflected in our government as a low-income single mom. I found out, of course, that I'm not reflected, not locally, not nationally, and not statewide. That runs antithetical to everything I believe, which is that unless and until we have all of our voices at the table, we are not going to see the changes that we want and need to see across this nation and across the state. I want to see us build a bottom-up economy, and that includes passing and signing legislation that was already passed this year, moving towards a housing first model for homelessness, and moving to 90 to 100% renewable energy more quickly. I also want to see us support and promote our strong education system, implement the ethnic studies standard, and centralize services closer to schools. On March 7th, I decided for sure that I would run for governor. On March 8th, my nephew died of a heroin overdose. He was the son of my brother who died 20 years ago of a heroin overdose. I watched the system fail him. I know that we need to focus on harm reduction first, treatment and recovery on demand, including medically assisted treatment on demand, dual diagnosis support, and criminal justice reform, which is why I put forth a comprehensive 4-part plan to heal the opioid epidemic endorsed by Chittenden County State's Attorney Sarah George. We also need to transform our transportation system. What I know is that when we are working on all the issues, when we have a governor that can connect the dots, when we redefine leadership, that is when we will see a Vermont that works for all of us.
So let's give them, all of these candidates, a round of applause. So it's also really good practice because I know firsthand that 90-second answers for these complex questions are not easy. And so I just want to compliment all of you on what a really great job that you did tonight. And I want to thank Sierra Club again for hosting and all of you for coming out on a weeknight, a rainy weeknight. And I think there's still maybe some refreshments. Feel free to mingle afterwards, talk to the candidates, and thank you all for coming.